The cruelest lies are the ones people applaud because they sound believable. Claire Whitmore had almost turned around 3 times before stepping through the gilded doors of the Grand Crescent Hotel ballroom. But at 38 years old, she had learned that fear only grows when you feed it. The charity gala glittered exactly the way these events always did in Manhattan. All crystal chandeliers, polished marble, and conversations that sounded warm until you listened closely enough to hear the judgment underneath. Men in tailored tuxedos stood near the bar, discussing investments in voices just loud enough to be overheard. Women in designer gowns smiled with perfect restraint while quietly measuring everyone else in the room. Claire adjusted the sleeve of her navy dress, simple and elegant, intentionally understated, and reminded herself she belonged here just as much as anyone else. She had received a legitimate invitation. She had every right to attend. Still, rights and comfort were rarely the same thing. The whispers started before she even made it 10 feet inside. She recognized that particular silence, the kind that fell when people noticed someone they had already discussed in private. She kept her expression neutral. A server passed carrying champagne flutes. A string quartet played something soft and expensive. Claire inhaled slowly, steadying herself. Then she heard his voice. "Well, this is unexpected. Ethan Whitmore." Even after 3 years of divorce, the sound of his voice still had the strange power to freeze something inside her. Claire turned. He stood near the center of the ballroom, looking exactly like the version of himself magazine profiles loved to photograph. Confident, successful, immaculate in a black tuxedo that probably cost more than most monthly rent payments. Beside him stood Madison Reed, younger, flawless, smiling the kind of smile that looked friendly until you saw who it was aimed at. Ethan lifted his glass slightly. "Claire." He said her name as if it were entertainment. Several nearby guests turned toward them immediately. Claire offered a small polite nod. "Ethan." She should have walked away right then. But Ethan had always understood performance, and he sensed an audience gathering the way some people sensed weather. He smiled wider. "I have to admit," he said, loud enough for half the room to hear, "I didn't expect to see you here. This is usually more of a donor crowd." A few nervous laughs surfaced. Claire felt heat rise in her chest, but kept her face composed. Madison tilted her head sympathetically in a way that felt almost rehearsed. "I'm sure there was no harm meant," Madison said sweetly, which somehow made it worse. Ethan shrugged theatrically. No, I'm serious. It's admirable, really. Confidence like that." More laughter now. Claire noticed 3 women she used to know from Ethan's business circle exchanging looks. One of them leaned closer to another and whispered something that made both of them smile. Ethan took a slow sip of champagne, watching her carefully. "How have you been, Claire?" he asked, then before she could answer, added, "Actually, let me guess. Reinventing yourself." Madison laughed softly, touching Ethan's arm. Claire's jaw tightened. "I'm doing fine." "That's good," Ethan said. Because for a while there, people were concerned. The implication landed exactly as intended. Claire knew what version of history he had sold. The unstable ex-wife. The emotionally difficult one. The woman who couldn't handle success. It was efficient, believable, and cruel because fragments of real pain had been rearranged into fiction. She glanced around the room. Faces watched openly now. Some curious. Some amused. Some pretending not to listen while listening to every word. Then a familiar older gentleman across the ballroom spotted her. His expression changed instantly with recognition, and he began moving toward her. Claire noticed. So did Ethan. Ethan's posture shifted almost imperceptibly. He stepped slightly sideways, keeping the man from approaching directly. "Interesting." Claire said nothing. Ethan smiled again, but something sharper had entered his eyes. "Tell me," he said, "do you still enjoy showing up where successful people gather?" The cruelty was cleaner now. Direct. Deliberate. Madison let out a breath that sounded suspiciously close to laughter. Claire reached into her purse, pulled out her phone, and typed 4 words. "It's happening. Be ready." She pressed send. Ethan noticed the movement. "Calling for backup?" he asked with a grin. Claire slipped the phone away. "No good," he said. "Because this conversation doesn't need rescuing." Then he leaned slightly closer, smiling for the crowd as if they were sharing a private joke, and said, "Let's be honest, Claire. The only reason anyone here remembers you is because of me." Silence spread in widening circles around them. Claire lifted her eyes to his. calm now in a way that surprised even her. "Are you sure?" she asked. Quietly. "That's the story you want to tell tonight?" For the first time that evening, Ethan did not answer immediately. It was subtle, barely visible to anyone who did not know him well, but Claire knew every version of his silence. There was the dismissive silence he used in meetings when he wanted other people to feel small. There was the polished silence he used with reporters when pretending to be thoughtful. And then there was this one, the kind that appeared when something had landed closer to the truth than he expected. But Ethan recovered quickly. He always had. He laughed lightly and lifted his glass as though Claire had offered a clever joke instead of a warning. "Still dramatic," he said. A few people smiled with him, relieved to be given permission to laugh again. Madison folded her arms gracefully and tilted her head. "Honestly, Claire, this does not have to be uncomfortable." Claire almost admired how smoothly the younger woman delivered cruelty disguised as concern. "Almost. It already is uncomfortable," Claire said evenly. "For some people more than others." Ethan gave her a long look, then chuckled. "You know what?" he said, turning slightly toward the nearby crowd. "This is exactly what I used to deal with. Every conversation somehow becoming emotional theater." Several people reacted with the quiet recognition of hearing a story they already believed. Claire saw it immediately. That was the genius of Ethan's version of history. He had never needed outrageous lies. Only selective truth. The most believable falsehoods always contained just enough reality to feel authentic. Yes, Claire had cried during the final year of their marriage. Yes, she had become withdrawn. Yes, she had stopped attending public events. Yes, she had left abruptly one night after an argument that several acquaintances had witnessed from a distance. All of that was true. What no one had cared to ask was why. People remember what they are told repeatedly, Claire said softly, almost to herself. Ethan smiled. What was that? Claire looked directly at him. Nothing. But it was not nothing. Because standing in that ballroom, under chandeliers and judgment, she could practically hear the ghost of the story Ethan had sold to everyone after the divorce. Claire was difficult. Claire had become unstable. Claire resented Ethan's success. Claire could not adapt to the pressures of his world. Claire left because she could not handle being married to a man with ambition. It had been neat, efficient, digestible. It had also protected him beautifully. A woman near the bar, Andrea Collins, someone Claire had once shared brunch with, stepped closer with polite curiosity. "Claire," Andrea said carefully, "it has been a long time." Claire offered a small smile. "It has." Andrea glanced between Claire and Ethan with the practiced diplomacy of someone avoiding discomfort. "I always wondered what happened." Ethan answered before Claire could. "Life happened." More small laughter. Madison smiled as though that settled everything. Claire watched them, not angry anymore, just observant. Strange how distance changed emotional weather. 3 years ago, this would have shattered her. Tonight, it simply clarified things. Because Ethan had spent years shaping narrative, and narrative was powerful. People believed what fit the image they already admired. Ethan Whitmore, self-made executive, disciplined strategist, philanthropic leader. Claire Whitmore, emotional former spouse who could not keep pace. The story worked because the public loved simplicity. They did not want complicated truths. They wanted recognizable archetypes. Ethan the builder, Claire the burden. Except that stories are dangerous when the supporting character remembers the original draft. Ethan set his champagne flute on a passing tray. Claire always had a gift for timing, he said. Showing up at exactly the moment attention is available. Madison gave an apologetic half-smile toward the guests, as though managing a difficult social inconvenience. Claire noticed a younger couple nearby, exchanging uncertain glances. Not everyone looked convinced anymore. Good. Tiny fractures mattered. "Do you remember Boston?" Claire asked suddenly. Ethan's expression changed by less than an inch. But Claire saw it. "What about Boston?" he asked. "Nothing," Claire said. "Just wondering whether you remember it the same way I do." Madison frowned slightly. "I feel like I walked into the middle of a movie." Ethan laughed again, but sharper this time. "Do not encourage her." Claire almost smiled. Because there it was. The impatience beneath the polish. Ethan always lost composure when he could not fully control framing. Across the room, the older gentleman who had tried approaching earlier remained near the edge of the ballroom, now speaking quietly with another guest while glancing toward Claire. Ethan noticed that too. "Interesting." "Claire," Ethan said in a lower voice. What exactly are you trying to do here? It was the first honest question he had asked all night. Claire met his gaze. Attend a charity event. No, Ethan said softly. Really? She considered answering. Instead, her mind slipped backward. Not because she wanted nostalgia, but because had answered. She did not check it yet. She did not need to. Timing mattered. Ethan followed the movement anyway. Still being mysterious? He asked. Claire gave him a measured look. No, just patient. And for the first time all evening, Ethan did not look amused. The shift in the room was subtle but undeniable. 10 minutes earlier, Claire had been entertainment. Now she was becoming a question, and questions were dangerous for men like Ethan. He smiled again, but this time the expression looked practiced instead of natural. Patient for what? He asked. Claire held his gaze. Truth has its own timing. Madison let out a quiet laugh, though it sounded less confident than before. That sounds dramatic even for a gala. Ethan slipped his hand casually into his pocket, the gesture controlled, but Claire recognized the tell. He did that when calculating. Claire, he said, if you came here hoping to rewrite history, I think you are overestimating audience interest. A few guests gave polite laughs, but fewer than before. Andrea looked uncomfortable. The younger couple near the bar had stopped pretending not to listen. Claire did not move. That is interesting, she said. Because you spent years making sure people stayed interested in your version. Ethan's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Madison stepped forward, voice smooth and bright. I think everyone has heard enough personal drama for one night. Then perhaps your boyfriend should stop performing it, Claire replied calmly. That landed harder than Claire expected. A few people exchanged glances. Madison's smile thinned. Ethan's expression cooled. Madison, he said quietly, it is fine. It was not fine. Claire could feel it now. The emotional weather had changed. Ethan needed control, and the room was slipping outside his script. Then a voice from behind the gathering crowd interrupted. Claire. She turned. It was Thomas Mercer, the older gentleman who had tried to approach her earlier. Former board member. Sharp memory. Sharp instincts. Ethan immediately straightened. Thomas. Ethan said quickly, stepping half a pace forward. Good to see you. But Thomas barely acknowledged him. His attention remained on Claire. I was not sure it was you, he said warmly. It has been years. Claire offered a genuine smile for the first time that evening. It has. Thomas nodded thoughtfully, then glanced at Ethan. Interesting reunion. Ethan chuckled. Nothing serious. Just old history. Thomas looked at him for a beat. Too long. Sometimes old history matters. Silence. Claire noticed Madison glance between them, suddenly less certain of the room. Ethan recovered fast. Thomas, I was just telling Claire people move on. Thomas replied evenly. Some people do. Some people simply rebrand. The line landed like a dropped glass. Not loud, but impossible to ignore. Ethan's smile froze for a fraction of a second. Claire almost admired Thomas for that. Ethan exhaled and reset his tone. Well, since we are revisiting old chapters, perhaps Claire would like to explain why she disappeared when things became difficult. There it was. A sharper escalation. Public accusation disguised as casual conversation. Several heads turned fully now. Madison folded her arms again, confidence returning slightly. Claire studied Ethan. Is that what you tell people? Is it inaccurate? Ethan asked. You left. That is true. You withdrew from everyone. Also true. Ethan spread his hands slightly as though presenting evidence. Then what exactly is the issue? Claire let the silence breathe. Truth without context is one of the easiest forms of manipulation. Ethan laughed. That sounds like something from a self-help podcast. A few strained laughs followed. Claire noticed Thomas watching Ethan closely now. Good. Tell them. Ethan said, voice sharpening. Tell everyone why you left. Madison tilted her head. Yes, actually. I am curious too. Claire looked at Madison, not unkindly. No, you are curious about whether the story you inherited is accurate. Madison's expression shifted. Ethan stepped in immediately. Enough. The word came too quickly, too forcefully. Claire saw Andrea notice it too. So did Thomas. Ethan softened his tone. This is becoming inappropriate. Claire almost smiled. Now. Then Ethan crossed the line he should have avoided. He looked around at the guests and said, let us not pretend this is about truth. Claire always struggled when attention was not centered on her. That was the real issue. The sentence hung in the air. Cruel. Precise. Familiar. and deeply dishonest. Claire felt the old sting for exactly 1 second. Then it passed. Because unlike years ago, she no longer needed validation from this room. She only needed timing. Her phone vibrated again. This time she checked it. One message. Here. Claire locked the screen and lifted her eyes to Ethan. Calm. Entirely calm. You really should not have said that, she said quietly. For the first time that night, Ethan looked not irritated, but uncertain. It lasted less than a second, but uncertainty always leaves fingerprints. Should not have said what? He asked, his voice still controlled, though the edges had sharpened. Claire slipped her phone back into her purse. The part where you confused repetition with truth. Madison exhaled softly. This is getting absurd. Thomas Mercer remained where he stood, saying nothing, but his silence now carried weight. Guests who had intended to drift away stayed exactly where they were. Even the quartet seemed quieter somehow, though perhaps that was only perception. Ethan forced a smile. You know what is fascinating, he said. People who rewrite the past usually rely on vague language because specifics do not favor them. Claire nodded once. Then let us be specific. That landed harder than anything else she had said. Ethan had expected defensiveness. Tears, maybe. Withdrawal. Not precision. He gave a short laugh. Please. Go ahead. Claire glanced around the room, not performing, simply measuring whether anyone was actually willing to hear something inconvenient. Thomas was. Andrea looked conflicted. The younger couple looked openly invested now. Madison looked annoyed. Ethan looked dangerous in the quiet, polished way powerful men often did when their narrative control weakened. Claire spoke calmly. When Ethan launched Whitmore Strategic Group, the first office was not a polished downtown suite. It was a converted storage room behind a logistics company in Evanston with a borrowed printer that jammed every 15 pages. A few guests blinked. Ethan smiled thinly. Ancient history. You are right, Claire said. Let us continue. Thomas crossed his arms, listening. Claire continued. The first investor deck was not written by Ethan alone. Ethan let out a quiet breath. That is not unusual. No, Claire agreed. Neither is gratitude. At least at the beginning. Madison shifted. I am not sure why startup nostalgia matters. Claire looked at her. Because myths have origin stories. Madison said nothing. Claire turned back toward the room. I worked full-time while Ethan built the company. I paid bills during the first 18 months when revenue was inconsistent. I edited proposals, coached presentations, organized operational models, and helped structure messaging before investor meetings. Ethan laughed dismissively. Claire, helping your spouse rehearse presentations does not make you a founder. No, Claire said. Signing away visibility does. Silence. Ethan's face remained composed, but Thomas's expression changed. He remembered something. Good. That is a dramatic interpretation, Ethan said. Is it? Claire asked. Do you remember the Midtown Advisory Dinner in 2012 when an investor asked why my name was not attached? Ethan's jaw shifted. Branding discussions from 14 years ago are not exactly relevant. Claire smiled faintly. Interesting. Because I remember your exact words. Cleaner branding. Thomas looked directly at Ethan now. Madison glanced between them. Andrea frowned, as though assembling memories she had never organized before. Ethan shrugged. Lots of spouses support businesses. Yes, Claire said, and many receive acknowledgement. Ethan's tone hardened. What exactly are you implying? Claire held his gaze. Nothing. I am stating. A server approached uncertainly with a tray, sensed the atmosphere, and immediately changed direction. Ethan noticed the room's attention tightening and tried a different tactic. This is unbelievable, he said with a soft laugh. We are turning a charity event into a review of household history. Thomas finally spoke. Were her contributions formally recognized? Ethan answered too quickly. That is not how early startups function. Thomas did not look convinced. Claire answered instead. No, they were not. Madison lifted her chin. If this is about wanting credit years later, that seems unhealthy. Claire studied her for a moment, and when she spoke, her tone was almost kind. This is not about credit. Madison folded her arms. Then what is it about? Claire looked at Ethan. Pattern. That word unsettled him more than accusation. Claire saw it instantly. Because pattern suggested continuity, not isolated misunderstanding. After the company stabilized, Claire continued. I plan to return to graduate school. Ethan cut in. Now we are discussing your educational choices. Our choices, Claire corrected. At the time, Ethan laughed again, but no one joined him this time. Claire continued anyway. We agreed it made sense financially to wait another year. Then another. Then another. Then Ethan's schedule became impossible. Client dinners, travel, board relationships, public positioning. There was always a strategic reason my plans could wait. Andrea looked downward. Something about that sounded familiar to her too. That was marriage, Ethan said. Compromise. Claire nodded slowly. Compromise requires mutual exchange. Thomas's expression sharpened. Madison was noticeably less relaxed now. Claire continued, voice steady and clear. The company grew. Ethan became increasingly visible. Articles appeared. Interviews. Awards. The narrative evolved. Self-made executive. Visionary strategist. Relentless architect of his own success. Ethan forced a smile. Because that is what happened. Claire tilted her head slightly. Entirely. Silence. The younger man, near the bar, whispered something to his partner. Ethan heard it. He hated whispers he could not control. This is absurd, Ethan said. Everyone in this room knows how hard I worked. I never said you did not, Claire replied. Hard work and selective storytelling can coexist. Thomas gave the smallest nod. Ethan saw it. That bothered him more than Claire's words. And then, Thomas asked quietly. Claire glanced at him. And then success changed incentives. Ethan spoke sharply. Enough. Claire ignored him. The more visible Ethan became, the less useful complexity was. Investors prefer clean narratives. Boards prefer certainty. Media prefers archetypes. That is enough, Ethan repeated. No, Claire said calmly. Not yet. The room had become completely still now. Even Madison had stopped interrupting. Claire could feel the precise moment curiosity shifted into doubt. That was when stories became unstable. The first time Ethan publicly referred to himself as entirely self-made. I corrected him afterward. Privately. He apologized. Said it was phrasing. The second time, he said nuance would only confuse people. The third time, he told me everyone simplifies. That was when I understood the story had become intentional. Ethan stared at her with cold restraint. This is your interpretation. No, Claire said. That was your sentence. Thomas looked directly at Ethan. Andrea's expression had changed completely now. Not belief exactly, but reconsideration. Ethan tried to regain ground. Even if any of this mattered, which it does not, none of it explains why you left. There it was again. Redirect. Push her toward the vulnerable chapter. Claire expected it. No, she said softly. It does not. Ethan smiled tightly, sensing movement. Exactly, Claire continued. Because what happened later was bigger. The smile faded. Madison looked at Ethan. What happened later? Ethan answered before Claire could. Personal difficulties. That is all. Claire almost laughed at the understatement. That is one way to describe it. Thomas narrowed his eyes. Claire. She looked at him. Yes. Why are you really here tonight? Claire paused. Honest question. Honest answer. Because I got tired of hearing a version of my life narrated by someone who needed me invisible. Silence. Ethan's voice dropped lower. Be careful. Claire met his gaze without flinching. That warning used to work. Then from the far side of the ballroom, a new voice called her name. Claire. This time, the entire room turned. Claire turned toward the voice and felt something unfamiliar move through her chest. Not fear. Relief. Rebecca Lawson crossed the ballroom with the calm confidence of someone who had never needed permission to enter any room in Manhattan. Senior partner at Lawson and Pierce. Corporate attorney. Precise memory. Dangerous to anyone who relied on selective truth. Ethan's expression changed instantly. Real alarm this time, impossible to hide. Madison looked confused. Who is that? She whispered. Ethan did not answer. Rebecca reached Claire and offered a warm but professional smile. I am sorry I was delayed. Claire nodded once. Timing worked. Rebecca glanced at Ethan, then at the increasingly silent audience. I can see that. Thomas Mercer recognized her immediately. Rebecca. She nodded politely. Thomas. Ethan forced composure. Interesting guest list tonight. Rebecca's expression did not change. I was invited. Ethan smiled thinly. By whom? Claire answered. By me. Madison looked openly lost now. Andrea stepped even closer. Ethan folded his hands. Executive calm, returning by effort alone. Are we staging something? Rebecca replied evenly. No. Though if facts feel theatrical, that is rarely the fault of the facts. Thomas almost smiled at that. Ethan looked at Claire. This has gone far enough. Claire held his gaze. That depends how close we are to honesty. Ethan turned toward the crowd with an exhausted expression designed to imply unreasonable drama. Ladies and gentlemen, I apologize for this deeply personal detour. Rebecca interrupted. You may want to wait before apologizing for the wrong thing. Silence tightened further. Madison looked from Ethan to Claire to Rebecca. Can someone please explain what is happening? Claire looked at her. You deserve context, actually. Ethan stepped forward. No, too fast. Too sharp. Rebecca noticed. Thomas noticed. Everyone noticed. Claire reached into her purse and removed the sealed envelope she had carried all evening. Ethan stared at it as if he recognized it immediately, which he did. Claire, he said, lower now. Almost controlled desperation. Do not. Madison's expression shifted. Ethan, Claire looked at the envelope, then at him. You remember this. Ethan's silence answered for him. Rebecca spoke calmly. For those interested in specifics, I was legal counsel during portions of the Whitmore restructuring period. Murmurs moved through the guests. Madison blinked. Restructuring? Claire nodded slightly. Yes. Ethan inhaled slowly. This is not appropriate. Rebecca replied. Appropriateness became complicated when public humiliation entered the conversation. Thomas folded his arms more tightly. What restructuring? Claire looked at Ethan one final time, offering him the opportunity to speak honestly. He said nothing. That told her everything she needed. 5 years ago, Claire began. Whitmore Strategic Group faced a serious internal crisis. Ethan immediately cut in. Confidential business matters are not for public discussion. Rebecca responded, certain elements are no longer confidential. Ethan looked at her sharply. Excuse me. Rebecca met his gaze without blinking. Settlement timelines expire. That sentence changed the room. Madison stared at Ethan. Settlement. Claire continued. A major operational error nearly cost the company a critical institutional relationship. If that relationship had collapsed publicly, Whitmore Strategic Group would have suffered catastrophic reputational damage. Thomas's expression hardened. I never heard about this. That was the point, Claire said. Ethan's voice became dangerously calm. You are distorting. Claire ignored him. At the same time, Ethan was dealing with significant personal stress. She chose the wording carefully. No cruelty, just truth. He was exhausted, under pressure, and making decisions without adequate oversight. Ethan laughed once, hollow and humorless. Now I am being medically profiled? Rebecca spoke. No one said that. Claire continued. The crisis required immediate containment. Legal review. Financial stabilization. Reputation control. Thomas looked between Rebecca and Ethan. And Claire held the envelope but did not open it yet. And someone had to absorb the fallout. Madison's voice was quiet now. What does that mean? Claire answered without looking away from Ethan. It means when advisors discussed public exposure, there was concern the company would not survive scrutiny attached directly to Ethan's leadership. Silence. Andrea put a hand to her chest. Ethan's face had gone still in a way Claire remembered from years ago, when emotion became calculation. That is a grotesque simplification, he said. Rebecca answered, not materially. Thomas stared at Ethan. Is this true? Ethan ignored him. Claire, enough. She continued. So an alternative narrative was constructed. Temporary separation from leadership risk. Personal instability inside the marriage. Domestic strain. Emotional complications. Madison took a small step backward from Ethan. No. Ethan looked at her immediately. Do not overreact. But she was not reacting. She was recalculating. Claire spoke carefully. The idea was not originally meant to become permanent. Thomas's voice sharpened. What idea? Claire looked at him directly. That personal instability could explain behavioral inconsistencies while protecting corporate confidence. Andrea whispered, my God. Ethan snapped. This is absurd. Rebecca calmly said, documentation exists. Claire finally opened the envelope. No theatrics. Just paper. Quiet proof. Ethan took one involuntary step forward. Claire. His voice had changed now. Less authority. More warning mixed with fear. Claire withdrew several documents, but did not hand them out yet. These are signed legal acknowledgments relating to temporary narrative containment strategy, transitional financial liability assumptions, and confidentiality limitations. Madison stared at Ethan as if seeing a stranger. What is she talking about? Ethan spoke fast now. Complex corporate legal language. She does not understand context. Rebecca's expression sharpened slightly for the first time. She understands it very well. Thomas held out a hand. May I? Claire gave him the top page. He read silently. His expression changed line by line. Ethan. No one had heard that tone from him before. Ethan remained silent. Claire continued because now there was no reason not to. I signed because at the time, I believed I was protecting what we built. Madison whispered, You signed what? Claire answered softly. Agreements that helped shield immediate reputational exposure while internal corrections were made. Andrea looked physically unsettled now. And afterward? Claire smiled sadly. Afterward, temporary became useful. Thomas looked up from the document. You allowed public assumptions about Claire's emotional instability? Ethan finally spoke. It was more complicated. Thomas's voice became colder. That is not what I asked. Ethan looked cornered for the first time all night. No one forced assumptions. Claire nodded once. True. They were merely encouraged. Madison removed her hand entirely from Ethan's arm and stepped farther away. Is any of this false? Ethan turned toward her. You do not understand corporate crisis management. Madison's face changed. That is not an answer. Rebecca added quietly. It is also not a denial. Silence. Thick and absolute. Claire should have felt triumph. She did not. Mostly she felt tired. But that is not the whole story, Thomas said, still holding the papers. Claire looked at him. No, Ethan's head turned sharply. There is no need. Claire cut him off for the first time. You lost the right to decide what needs saying when you chose humiliation over silence. Ethan actually looked wounded by that, though perhaps it was only ego. Claire continued. The company crisis is what changed the marriage publicly. It is not what ended it privately. Madison whispered. Then what did? Claire inhaled once. The room waited. Rebecca stood beside her without speaking. Thomas remained utterly still. Ethan looked like a man trying to calculate 10 outcomes at once and liking none of them. Claire's voice softened, but every word carried. 3 years ago, after everything I protected, after every compromise, every delay, every rewritten version of myself, I discovered Ethan had finalized something without telling me. Ethan closed his eyes briefly. Madison looked between them. What? Claire met Ethan's gaze. The divorce strategy. The room went silent in a new way. Not curiosity now. Shock. Claire continued. Before he ever told me the marriage was over, advisory conversations had already happened. Reputation framing had already been discussed. Language positioning had already been shaped. Andrea whispered. No, Thomas looked physically angry now. Ethan spoke at last, voice low and strained. That is not fair. Claire almost laughed at the choice of words. Fair. Then she lifted the final document from the envelope. This, she said quietly, is the draft communication plan your consultants prepared before our separation became public. No one moved. No one spoke. Madison looked at Ethan like she had never seen him before. And for the first time all evening, Ethan Whitmore had absolutely nothing to say. The silence that followed felt heavier than anything Ethan had said all evening. Not because Claire had raised her voice. Not because she had tried to humiliate him. But because truth has a way of removing all the decorative language people use to protect themselves. Ethan stared at the document in Claire's hand as though distance alone might make it disappear. Madison stepped back another full pace. Andrea said nothing. Thomas Mercer slowly handed the earlier pages to Rebecca, his expression colder than Claire had ever seen. Ethan finally spoke, but his voice sounded unfamiliar now, stripped of the polished confidence that had carried him through boardrooms and interviews. Claire. Just her name. Nothing strategic. Nothing rehearsed. Claire looked at him calmly. You had years to tell the truth. He swallowed hard. It was not that simple. Thomas answered before Claire could. Integrity rarely is. Ethan turned toward him. Thomas, you do not understand the context. Thomas gave a short, humorless breath. I understand enough. Madison looked directly at Ethan. Did you plan the public story before ending your marriage? Ethan hesitated. That hesitation was answer enough. Madison's face changed completely. Not anger. Recognition. The kind that comes when illusion collapses faster than emotion can keep up. I need some air, she said quietly, then turned and walked away without waiting for a response. Ethan watched her go, but only briefly. His attention returned to Claire because, for perhaps the first time, he understood that this was never about spectacle. It was about consequence. I was trying to protect everything, he said. Claire nodded once. Including yourself. He looked exhausted now. Older somehow. That is unfair. Claire held his gaze. No. What was unfair was allowing strangers to believe I collapsed when I was carrying what you did not want exposed. Andrea lowered her eyes. Several guests shifted uncomfortably. No one defended Ethan. That silence said more than argument ever could. Ethan took a slow breath. I never meant for it to become this. Claire almost smiled. That sentence explains more than you think. Rebecca stepped slightly closer, not to intervene, only to stand beside truth while it existed. Thomas spoke quietly. You built a reputation on selective honesty. That always expires eventually. Ethan looked around the ballroom as though only now realizing the audience he had once controlled no longer belonged to him. Claire felt no victory in that. Only clarity. She slid the documents back into the envelope and closed it. Ethan noticed. That is it, he asked, almost disoriented. Claire understood the question. No dramatic destruction. No shouting. No revenge performance. Just truth. Yes, she said. That is it. You were just leaving? He asked. What did you expect? Claire replied. A public punishment. Ethan said nothing. Because perhaps he had. Claire adjusted the strap of her purse and looked at him one last time. You humiliated me because you thought silence meant weakness. Her voice remained steady. Sometimes silence is simply dignity waiting for the right moment. Ethan lowered his eyes. For the first time in years, he had no narrative available. No elegant reframing. No audience willing to help him maintain illusion. Just consequences. Claire turned toward the exit. Thomas stepped aside respectfully. Rebecca gave her the smallest nod. Andrea looked ashamed. The younger couple near the bar watched with the kind of attention people reserve for moments they will repeat later. Claire walked through the ballroom without rushing. No applause followed. No dramatic confrontation. Only silence. But this time, the silence belonged to her.